NeuralSurfer presents the bookstore that collects what you forget. Stories inspired by classic literature, narrated by George B.
Taza de café frío en la mesa manchada del once, el diario doblado en tragedia a las manos, buscando un sobre, trenes que rozan mi nombre, en los vidrios empañados, una frase subrayada en silencio.
I first saw the shoe repair stall the way you notice a small bruise on your own arm, accidentally, then obsessively. It was wedged under a faded awning on Calle Defensa, a few blocks from Plaza Dorrego, right where San Telmo begins to feel like an old photograph that refuses to yellow. The sign above it said, Zapateria in hand-painted black letters that had cracked into islands. Underneath, in smaller script, it promised reparaciones and, almost as an afterthought, zapatos de tango. A pair of women's heels hung from a nail like a pendant, their leather straps curled from heat and sweat and waiting. The man behind the counter, thin grey hair combed back, glasses perched low, fingers stained with glue, looked up as if he'd been expecting my footsteps to sound a certain way. "Buscas algo o solo miras, che?" he asked. "Are you looking for something or just looking? In Buenos Aires, you can be called chi by a stranger, and it doesn't feel like intimacy. It feels like being placed, as if the word is a coordinate." "I'm just looking," I said in Spanish that still held the edges of somewhere else. I'd lived outside the city long enough that my vowels had migrated, but the rhythm remained. The man, later I would learn his name was Nestor, though everyone called him Don Nestor, as if it were both respect and warning, tilted his head. He had a craftsman's patience in the tilt, the way he gave time to objects to become what they were meant to be. "Entonces mira bien," he said. "Then look well." The stall smelled of leather, of polish, of something sweet and chemical. Behind him, shelves rose to the ceiling, cluttered with shoe trees and spools of thread, a cigar box of nails and old tango posters curled at the corners. And at the back, behind a curtain made of dark wooden beads, there was a space that didn't match the geometry of the narrow shop, a seam in the room like the edge of a hidden pocket. If you've grown up in Buenos Aires, you're taught early that the city has pockets. Pockets in buildings, pockets in conversations, pockets in history. We call them trastiendas, back rooms. My father used to say that every family has a trastienda too, a room you don't bring visitors into, a room where the real ledger is kept. He said that while making mate in our kitchen in Queens, the bombilla clicking against the gourd, the steam fogging the window that looked out onto a street that could never be Defensa. He said it like a joke. He also said it like a confession. I hadn't been back in Buenos Aires in 9 years when I walked into Don Nestor's stall. 9 years is long enough for a city to change its skin but keep its bones. The subte stations still breathed warm air up through the grates. Colectivos still growled and swayed as if the asphalt were water, and the jacarandas still exploded purple in spring and then littered the sidewalks like bruises. But I'd returned for a reason that makes cities either sharper or dulled. My father had died, and in his death he'd left me a box of papers I didn't understand. Not wills or deeds, he'd had no property worth listing, but notes, names, half-translated poems, a key with no label, and a single sentence written in his careful hand. "Si alguna vez volves, busca la Trastienda de Papel. If you ever go back, look for the paper back room." I'd thought it was metaphor, a final flourish from a man who read Borges the way other men read weather reports. But then my flight landed at Ezeiza under a grey sky, and on my second day in the city, I found myself walking through San Telmo as if pulled by a string tied to my ribs, passing antique shops and cafes with tables spilling onto the pavement, passing tourists bargaining over mate cups they would never use, passing a Fil Teado sign that said Bienvenidos with swirls like music, until I stood under the awning that said Zapateria and saw the beaded curtain at the back. "Do you repair shoes?" I asked Don Nestor, because it was easier to pretend I was here for something ordinary. He snorted softly, as if the question itself were naive. "Reparo lo que la gente rompe," he said. "I fix what people break." "But you don't have any shoes," I lied, and he watched my hands the way he might watch someone's feet. "No," I admitted. I'm looking for something. He leaned back on his stool, his knees popping slightly, and he studied me. Outside, the afternoon light was thinning. Somewhere nearby, a bandoneon practiced a phrase and then stopped as if embarrassed. "Sos hija de Andrés Rivas?" he asked. "Are you Andrés Rivas's daughter?" My throat tightened. In this city, names travel like gossip. "Yes," I said. He nodded once, as if confirming a measurement. "Entonces ya estás en lo correcto," he said. "Then you're already in the right place." He gestured with his chin toward the back. "Pero no se entra así nomás," he added. "But you don't enter just like that." "How do I enter?" I asked. And the question sounded ridiculous in my own ears, like asking how to enter a dream. Don Nestor reached under his counter, rummaged, and produced a small, battered book. He set it down in front of me with surprising gentleness. The cover was soft from handling, the corners rounded. A cheap poetry collection, the kind you buy on impulse and later find used as a coaster. The title, embossed in fading gold, read Poemas Escogidos, Selected Poems, no author on the cover. "Compralo," he said. "Buy it." "I don't want compralo," he repeated, firmer. "No es caro. It's not expensive." "How much?" I asked. He named a price that could have been real or symbolic. I pulled bills from my wallet and he didn't count them, just slid them into a tin. He pushed the book toward me. "Ahora and date," he said. "Now go." "That's it?" "Eso," he said, and his eyes flicked to the beaded curtain. "Léelo cuando estés sola." "Read it when you're alone." I left the stall feeling like I'd been tricked, which in Buenos Aires is sometimes another form of being guided. I walked toward Plaza Dorrego, letting the crowd carry me. The plaza was paved and bright, cafes surrounding it like attentive relatives. Tourists took pictures of the old lampposts. A couple practiced tango steps on the stones, their shoes making small percussive sounds, their bodies close but their faces serious. I sat at a table at a cafe on the edge, ordered a cortado, and held the book in my lap like a warm secret. I kept telling myself it was nothing. My father's sentence, Don Nestor's insistence, the beaded curtain, romantic nonsense. I was a translator, not a detective. I lived in Brooklyn now. My job was words, not mysteries. And yet, when I got back to my rented apartment on Chile Street, a narrow place with high ceilings and an old fan that clicked like a tired insect, I opened the book with the caution you use for something that might cut. The pages smelled like dust and perfume. On the first page, in a loose cursive, someone had written a dedication. "Para quien encuentre esto cuando ya no me recuerden." For whoever finds this when they no longer remember me. My fingers prickled. I flipped through the poems, trying to see if any were familiar. They were decent, melancholy, city-focused, full of shadows and tramlines, the kind of poems Buenos Aires breeds the way the river breeds fog. Then halfway through, something stiff pressed against the paper. I shook the book gently, and a ticket slid out onto my bedspread. It was a train ticket, crisp and white, printed with a barcode and black text. Trenes Argentinos. Origen, Buenos Aires, Retiro. Destino, Rosario Norte. Fecha, mañana, tomorrow. The date was the next day's date, printed as plainly as my own name on an ID. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Tomorrow. But how? I checked my phone, as if the ticket might have changed the calendar. It hadn't. I checked the time. Still the same. I held the ticket up to the light. It looked real, fresh, uncreased. Someone had bought it, printed it, placed it inside this battered poetry collection, and then somehow it had ended up in a shoe repair stall behind a beaded curtain. My father had loved puzzles, but he'd never been cruel. He wouldn't send me on a scavenger hunt that made my heart hammer for no reason. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of the building, pipes, footsteps, a distant television, and tried to explain the ticket to myself in a way that didn't require magic. Maybe it was old and the date was a coincidence. But the ticket clearly read tomorrow's date, and the fare printed in pesos matched current fares, not something from years ago. Someone had bought it recently. Why put it in a poetry book? Why give the book to me? And why did the dedication on the first page feel like a hand gripping my wrist? I went back to the book and turned the pages again, slower. I looked for glue residue, for hidden pockets. My father's box of papers sat in the corner of the room, unopened like a stubborn animal. The key he'd left me was taped to an index card. the metal cool against my skin when I touched it. It had no obvious markings. I held it up, trying to imagine what it might open. My apartment door used a modern lock. The building's hallway doors had old-fashioned keys, but mine already came with one. This key was older, heavier. It belonged to something that wanted to stay shut. I slept poorly that night, the ticket on my nightstand like an accusation. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of trains, long silver bodies sliding through dark fields, windows full of faces that looked like mine and not like mine. In the morning I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sensation that I'd forgotten something important, something I'd never known in the first place. The ticket was still there. The date was now today's date because the day had changed, which meant the ticket, dated tomorrow, was now dated tomorrow again. It stayed one day ahead. I stared at it until my coffee went cold. Then, because there was nothing else to do with the mystery but follow it, I went back to San Telmo. Don Nestor was in his stall, a shoe on his knee, his fingers working. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Encontraste el boleto," he said. "You found the ticket." "Yes," I said. "What is it?" "Un boleto," he replied, as if I was slow. "A ticket." "It's dated tomorrow," I snapped. "I didn't buy it." His fingers paused. He looked up at me over his glasses, and for a moment his eyes were less amused. "Nadie compra lo que no paga," he said. "Nobody buys what they don't pay for." I felt heat rise in my face. "I paid for the book," I said, "with money." "Con plata compras papel," he said. "With money you buy paper. Lo demás se cobra distinto. The rest is charged differently." He put the shoe down, wiped his hands on a rag, and nodded toward the beaded curtain. "Ahora sí," he said. "Now yes." He stood, crossed the narrow space, and with two fingers pushed the curtain aside. The beads clicked softly, like teeth. Behind them there was not a wall but an opening, and beyond it a corridor so narrow I had to turn sideways. The air changed as soon as I stepped through, cooler and dry, smelling of old paper and something faintly floral, like pressed violets. Don Nestor didn't follow. He stood at the threshold, his hand still holding the beads. "No toques nada hasta que te digan," he warned. "Don't touch anything until they tell you." "Who?" I asked, but he'd already let the beads fall back into place behind me. The corridor led to a false wall of encyclopedias, rows and rows of matching spines, their titles in gold, their uniformity too perfect. I ran my fingertips along them, resisting the urge to pull one out. Then a voice spoke from the other side of the wall, close and calm. "No los mires como si fueran de verdad," the voice said. "Don't look at them as if they're real." "Sorry," I said, startled. A panel slid aside without a sound, and I found myself staring into a room that should not have fit behind a shoe stall. It was narrow, yes, but long, with shelves that climbed toward a high ceiling and a single skylight that let in a pale wedge of daylight. Dust motes drifted like slow snow. The shelves held books of every size, leather-bound volumes, paperbacks, bundles of letters tied with string. A small table sat in the center, and behind it a woman about 60 sat with a ledger open in front of her. She had gray hair cut bluntly at her jaw, earrings like small coins, and a face that looked carved rather than aged. Sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, eyes that had seen too many people ask for too much. She wore black, not dramatically but practically, as if color were a distraction. "Valentina Rivas," she said, and I didn't like that she knew my full name. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "I'm looking for la Trastienda de Papel." "La encontraste," she said. "You found it." She tapped the ledger with one finger. "Tu padre habló de vos." Your father spoke of you. "My father is dead," I said, and the words still tasted strange, like speaking a language I wasn't fluent in. The woman's expression softened, but only in the way a door softens when it's opened a crack. "Lo sé," she said. "I know. Lo siento. I'm sorry." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sentate," she said. "Sit." I sat, my eyes scanning the shelves. My translator's brain catalogued titles, languages, the signs of rarity, stitched bindings, foxing on pages, the patina of age that can't be faked easily. But my other brain, the one that belonged to my father, looked for patterns. The room felt like a throat, as if the books were teeth and the ledger was a tongue. "You sell books?" I asked, because I needed something simple. The woman smiled faintly. Vendemos historias, she said. We sell stories. Books are stories, I said. No siempre, she replied. Not always. She slid her gaze to my hands. Trajiste el libro, she said. You brought the book. I pulled Poemas Escogidos from my bag and set it on the table. I hesitated, then placed the train ticket beside it. The woman's eyes flicked to the ticket, and something like recognition passed through her, quick as a match flare. Ah, she murmured. El boleto. What is it? I asked again, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached under the table and pulled out a smaller book wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently, revealing a slim, worn volume with a plain cover. The title, printed in modest type, read, Fervor de Buenos Aires. My heart stumbled. Even if you aren't a collector, you know that title here. It's part of the city's myth, like Gardel's smile or the smell of rain on hot pavement. Borges's first book of poems, published in 1923 in a tiny edition, most copies lost or hidden, a book that began a life of labyrinths and mirrors. I'd translated Borges once, a short piece for a magazine, and I'd felt as if I were translating smoke. The woman placed the book on the table between us, as if laying down a weapon. It's real, I whispered before I could stop myself. Eso es lo que dicen, she said. That's what they say. La primera impresión, la que falta. The first printing, the one that's missing. You have it? I asked, incredulous. She shrugged lightly. A veces los libros aparecen donde no deberían, she said. Sometimes books appear where they shouldn't. And the dedication, I asked, because my father's notes had included that word, underlined twice. Dedicatoria. The woman opened the book carefully. The pages were unnumbered, the paper thick and slightly uneven. The poems were printed in a typeface that looked old without being ornate. She turned to the first page. There, in dark ink, was a handwritten dedication. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, controlled. It did not look like the signatures I'd seen of Borges, his later shaky hand, his familiar flourish. This was different, more assured, more anonymous. It read, Para la ciudad que me inventó, for the city that invented me. Beneath it was a name, but the letters seemed to shift when I tried to focus, like heat above asphalt. I blinked, and the name resolved into something that made no sense. Y Ayeta. Anselmo Ayeta? I blurted, thinking of the street near Plaza Dorrego, named after the bandoneonist and composer. The woman's eyes sharpened. No digas nombres en voz alta, she said softly. Don't say names out loud. Why? I demanded, my pulse quickening. She closed the book with a quiet thump. Porque los nombres se van, she said, because names leave. Y a veces vuelven con otra cara. And sometimes they return with another face. I stared at her, feeling suddenly like I'd stepped into one of my father's stories, the kind he told after a glass of wine when the city outside our Queen's apartment felt too far away. This is a scam, I said, but it sounded weak. The woman leaned forward. Her eyes were dark and steady. Tu padre no era un hombre ingenuo, she said. Your father wasn't a naive man. Si te mandó acá es porque sabía que ibas a entender. If he sent you here, it's because he knew you would understand. Understand what? I asked. The woman looked at my hands again, and I realized with a jolt that my fingers were inching toward the book as if drawn by gravity. I pulled them back, clasped them together. You told me not to touch, I said. Todavía, she replied. Not yet. She tapped the ledger again. The ledger was thick, bound in dark leather, its pages edged in red. It looked like something from a bank or a church, something meant to record debts and forgiveness. What is that? I asked. La cuenta, she said. The account. The account of what? She opened it wider, and I saw columns ruled in ink. Dates, names, items, amounts. But the items weren't books. They were words. I leaned in. One entry read, 12 de mayo, ML, un recuerdo de infancia, cobrado, a childhood memory, collected. Another, 14 de mayo, SP, coartada, cobrado, alibi, collected. Another, 15 de mayo, JR, nombre, cobrado, name, collected. I sat back, cold spreading through my chest. This is a joke, I said, but my voice cracked. The woman watched me as if watching someone recognize their own reflection for the first time. Viste? she said gently. You see? No anotamos lo que vendemos, she continued. We don't write down what we sell. Anotamos lo que cobramos. We write down what we collect. That's insane, I said. You can't collect a memory. No? She asked, tilting her head. Nunca sentiste que te faltaba algo y no sabías qué? Haven't you ever felt like something was missing and you didn't know what? My mouth went dry. I thought of the way I'd woken that morning with the sensation of forgetting something I'd never known. I thought of the dedication in the poetry book, for whoever finds this when they no longer remember me. What did you take from me? I asked, the question scraping my throat. The woman's expression remained calm. She flipped a few pages in the ledger, her finger moving down the columns. Valentina Rivas, she read aloud softly, and hearing my name in that room made it feel less like mine. Ayer, she said, yesterday. Pagaste con... She paused as if tasting the words. Con un detalle, she said, finally, with a detail. ¿Qué detalle? I demanded. What detail? She looked up at me, and for the first time there was something like pity in her eyes. El nombre de tu primer amor, she said. The name of your first love. I laughed once, sharply, because it was absurd. But as the sound left my mouth, I reached for the memory automatically, the way you reach for your phone in your pocket without thinking, and my mind found only blank air. I saw a face in my imagination, blurred at the edges like a photograph rubbed with a thumb. I saw a summer sidewalk and ice cream melting down a wrist. I felt a rush of emotion with no anchor, love without a name attached. Panic rose, hot and humiliating. That's not funny, I whispered. No es un chiste, the woman said. It's not a joke. Tu padre pagó muchas veces, she added quietly. Your father paid many times. I stared at her. For what? I asked. Para que no te falte lo que te falta, she said. So that what's missing doesn't miss you. The sentence made no sense and perfect sense at the same time, like Borges. And the train ticket? I asked, forcing myself back to something tangible. The ticket keeps saying tomorrow. The woman's gaze flicked to it again. Ese boleto no es tuyo, she said. That ticket isn't yours. Entonces, ¿por qué lo tengo? Then why do I have it? She tapped the ticket with a fingernail. Porque alguien lo dejó para vos, she said, because someone left it for you. Y porque te está siguiendo, and because it's following you. Following me, I repeated, my stomach tightening. The woman closed the ledger and folded her hands on top of it. No te voy a explicar todo de golpe, she said. I'm not going to explain everything all at once. Hay reglas, she added. There are rules. Rules for what? For stealing people's memories? I said, anger flaring because fear needed somewhere to go. Her eyes hardened slightly. No usamos la palabra robar, she said. We don't use the word steal. Acá nadie se lleva nada gratis, she continued. Here nobody takes anything for free. La gente viene porque quiere. People come because they want to. And the ones who don't know what they're paying? I shot back. Eso también lo quieren, she said, and her certainty chilled me. That too they want. I stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. I'm leaving, I said, and I'm taking my book back. I reached for Poemas Escogidos, and as my fingers touched the cover, a jolt ran up my arm like static. For a split second, the room tilted. I smelled cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. I heard a woman's laugh close to my ear. I saw, impossibly, a train platform under harsh fluorescent light, and my own hands, holding the same ticket, the date different, the ink slightly smudged. Then it vanished, leaving me dizzy. I snatched my hand back, breathing hard. The woman watched me without surprise. Te dije que no toques, she said. I told you not to touch. What was that? I whispered. Un recuerdo prestado, she said. A borrowed memory. My skin crawled. From who? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she nodded toward the shelves, toward the far end of the room where a small doorway stood half hidden behind hanging maps. Anda, she said. Go. ¿A dónde? Where? A ver lo que tu padre quiso que vieras, she said. To see what your father wanted you to see. I should have refused. I should have walked back through the beads and into daylight and told myself I'd hallucinated. But grief is a kind of gravity, and my father's sentence was still pulling. I walked toward the doorway, the floorboards creaking softly under my steps. As I passed the shelves, I noticed objects tucked among the books. A child's marble, a pressed flower, a small silver ring, a faded photograph of a woman smiling beside a river that looked like the Rio de la Plata. Tokens, payments, proof that the ledger wasn't metaphor. The doorway opened into a smaller room, dimmer, with stacks of books on the floor and a desk covered in papers. A single lamp cast a cone of light. On the desk sat an old typewriter, keys worn, and beside it a framed photograph of my father, younger than I'd ever seen him, standing in Plaza Dorrego with a woman whose face had been scratched out. My breath caught. I stepped closer, and my hand lifted without my permission toward the frame. I stopped myself, fingers trembling. Next to the photograph lay a thin notebook in my father's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The same careful script from the box of papers. My father's notebook was here in this secret room behind a shoe stall in San Telmo, as if he'd never really left the city at all. I opened it, my heart thudding, and read the first line. Si estás leyendo esto, es porque te cobraron algo que no sabías que debías. If you're reading this, it's because they charged you something you didn't know you owed. I swallowed hard and kept reading. The notebook was part diary, part map, part warning. My father wrote about La Trastienda de Papel as if it were both sanctuary and trap. He wrote about the ledger, about the way people came to erase guilt, to forget lovers, to trade away fear. He wrote about names taken and stored like coins. He wrote about the rare book, Fervor de Buenos Aires, and the dedication that didn't belong. And he wrote about something called El Boleto de Mañana, the tomorrow ticket, which he described as a debt that moved from person to person, a day stolen and passed along. At the bottom of the page he'd drawn a small diagram, a bench in Plaza Dorrego, a circle around it, and an arrow pointing toward it labeled cuerpo, body. My stomach lurched. I flipped pages quickly, searching for dates. The last entry was only 2 weeks old. My father had been dead 3 months. The ink was fresh, the paper unyellowed. My mind tried to reject it, but the notebook sat solid under my hands. I heard footsteps behind me and whirled. The woman stood in the doorway, silent as dust. Eso no debería estar acá, I said, holding the notebook up like evidence. That shouldn't be here. Tu padre lo dejó, she replied. Your father left it. He's dead, I said again, louder because saying it felt like drawing a line. Los muertos también dejan cosas, she said. The dead leave things too. I stared at the notebook, at the recent ink, and a cold thought slid into place. Either my father had been here very recently under some impossible circumstance, or someone was writing as him. Who's doing this? I demanded. Who wrote these last pages? The woman's expression tightened. No me hagas decirlo, she said. Don't make me say it. Say it, I insisted. Hay gente que vuelve, she said finally. There are people who return. Y hay gente que nunca se fue. And there are people who never left. A sound drifted in faintly through the walls. The city outside, muffled but present. A horn, a shout, life continuing. In the notebook, the diagram of the bench stared back at me. What's going to happen in Plaza Dorrego? I asked, my voice smaller. The woman held my gaze. Ya pasó, she said. It already happened. My stomach dropped. When? I whispered. Esta mañana, she said. This morning. The room seemed to tilt again, but this time it wasn't a jolt of borrowed memory. It was the sickening shift of reality when you realize you're late. Who? I asked. ¿Quién murió? Who died? The woman's lips pressed together. She hesitated, then said, Un cliente. A client. No sé si era bueno o malo, she added. I don't know if he was good or bad. Solo sé que vino a pagar, y no alcanzó. I only know he came to pay, and it wasn't enough. My throat tightened. Why didn't you tell the police? I demanded. The woman gave a humorless smile. La policía? She repeated. The police. Acá la policía no entiende de cuentas, she said. Here the police don't understand accounts. Y a veces vienen a pagar también. And sometimes they come to pay too. A chill ran through me. "I have to go," I said, shoving the notebook into my bag. "No podes," the woman said. "You can't." "Why not?" I snapped. She nodded toward the desk, toward a small object I hadn't noticed. A stamp, the kind used in old libraries, its handle worn. Beside it lay a stack of cards with names typed neatly on them. Some were crossed out. Some were smudged, as if erased. "Porque ya estás en la cuenta," she said quietly. "Because you're already in the account. I left anyway." I pushed through the beaded curtain, beads clacking like nervous teeth, and emerged into Don Nestor's stall. The smell of leather hit me like a slap. Don Nestor looked up, took one look at my face, and nodded as if he'd expected this expression. "Plaza Dorrego," I said, and my voice sounded hoarse. He didn't ask why. He simply said, "Anda rapido," and returned to his shoe as if the world could be held together by stitching. I half ran through the street, weaving between tourists and locals, my bag thumping against my hip. The plaza was only a few blocks away, but each step felt heavy, as if the cobblestones wanted to keep me. When I reached Plaza Dorrego, the afternoon crowd had changed. There were police, a cordon of tape, a small cluster of onlookers held back by uniformed officers from the Policía de la Ciudad. People craned their necks, whispering. Cameras flashed. The tango couple was gone, replaced by a tense stillness that made the plaza feel suddenly naked. I approached the tape, heart pounding. A young officer held up a hand. "No se puede pasar," he said. "You can't go through." I started, then realized I didn't know what I was. Not family, not press, not police. Just a woman with a ticket dated tomorrow and a notebook that shouldn't exist. "I'm a friend," I lied, and the lie felt thin. The officer's eyes flicked over me, unimpressed. "Nombre del fallecido?" Name of the deceased. I opened my mouth and nothing came. I didn't know. I didn't know because the woman had refused, because perhaps the ledger had already taken it. My hesitation gave the officer his answer. "No," he said, and turned away. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to see past the bodies and the tape. And then I saw the bench. It was one of the plaza's old benches. Metal arms, wooden slats, painted dark. On it sat a man's body, slumped as if resting. A white sheet covered most of him, but one hand protruded, fingers curled around a book. The book's cover was visible, and my stomach twisted. It was a book from La Trastienda de Papel, I was sure of it, because the cover had a small embossed symbol in the corner, a keyhole surrounded by a circle. I hadn't noticed it in Poemas Escogidos before, but now I saw it clearly on the book in the dead man's hand. A woman beside me whispered to her friend, "Dicen que se murió solo, ahí sentado, como si nada." They say he died alone, sitting there as if nothing. Another voice murmured, "San Telmo ya no es lo que era." San Telmo isn't what it used to be. I stared at the dead hand holding the book and thought of my father's diagram. Body on a bench, arrow, as if the death had been scheduled like a train. I stepped back, dizzy, and bumped into someone. "Pardon," I muttered, turning. A man stood behind me, about 40, wearing a dark jacket, his hair trimmed short, his eyes sharp. He didn't look like a tourist. He didn't look like an onlooker. He looked like someone who had authority, even without a uniform. He held a small notebook and a pen. "Valentina Rivas," he said. My blood went cold. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Inspector Tomas Sosa," he said, showing me a badge quickly. "Policía de la Ciudad." He watched my face closely, as if measuring my reaction. "You know my name," I said. He nodded slightly. "Your name came up," he said, "in connection with a book." My throat tightened. "What book?" I asked, though I already knew. Sosa's gaze flicked toward the bench, toward the dead man's hand. "The book he was holding," he said. "It doesn't belong to him. There's no record of purchase, no receipt, nothing." He paused. "But someone told one of my officers that you tried to get through the tape and claimed to be a friend." His tone was neutral, but his eyes were not. "Are you a friend?" I hesitated. In my bag, the ticket felt like it was burning through fabric. "I don't know him," I said finally, "but I might know where the book came from." Sosa studied me for a beat too long, then said, "Walk with me." He led me away from the tape, toward a corner of the plaza where the cafe's tables had been cleared to make space for police. The smell of coffee and fried pastries mingled with the metallic tang of adrenaline. "Start from the beginning," Sosa said. "Tell me why you're in San Telmo, why you were trying to get to the body, and why you think you know where that book came from." I could have lied. I could have given him a simple story. I'm a tourist. I got curious. I saw a bookshop. But the way he said my name told me he already had threads, and any lie would tangle. So I told him a version of the truth that sounded like fiction. A shoe repair stall, a hidden bookstore, a ledger, my father's note. I left out the part about memories being taken because it sounded insane even to me, and I didn't want to see skepticism harden into dismissal. But I did mention the title that mattered. "They have a copy of Fervor de Buenos Aires," I said quietly. Sosa's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Borges," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, "a first printing." Sosa let out a slow breath. "That book is worth a lot of money," he said. "People kill for less." The word kill made my stomach clench and my eyes drifted back to the tape, to the sheet, to the hand clutching paper like a lifeline. "Who is he?" I asked. Sosa's jaw tightened. "We don't have a name yet," he said. "No ID, no phone, nothing." He tapped his notebook. "It's like he was erased." The phrase hit me like a slap. Erased. "What about fingerprints?" I asked, grasping at procedural logic. "We'll run them," Sosa said, "but sometimes even fingerprints don't help." He paused, then added, "Unless someone remembers him." I swallowed. Remember? The word felt loaded now. "The book," I said. "What book is he holding?" Sosa's eyes narrowed. "You tell me," he said. "You said you know where it came from." I hesitated, then said, "There's a place. A hidden place. They might have records." "Records of sales?" he asked. I thought. Of the ledger, of its columns listing memories and names like debts. "Records," I repeated weakly. Sosa watched me closely. "Take me there," he said. "Now!" My instinct screamed no. If the woman in black was right, police didn't understand accounts. Or they did, which was worse. But the dead man on the bench had no name, and my father's notebook was pushing me forward like a hand on my back. "All right," I said, "but it's not a normal bookstore." Sosa gave me a thin smile. "Most things aren't," he said. We walked through the streets of San Telmo together, the afternoon light slanting between buildings, casting long shadows. Sosa moved like someone used to crowds, stepping around tourists without apology, eyes scanning reflexively. I tried to match his pace, my mind racing. If I brought him to La Trastienda de Papel, what would happen? Would the woman deny everything? Would Don Nestor play dumb? Would the ledger hide itself? Would Sosa laugh, write me off as grieving and unstable? Or would he recognize the place, the way Don Nestor recognized me? When we reached the shoe stall, Don Nestor was still there, still stitching, as if the day hadn't cracked open. He looked up, saw Sosa, and his expression didn't change much, which told me more than surprise would have. "Buenas," Sosa said. Don Nestor nodded. "Inspector," he replied, as if greeting a regular customer. My stomach sank. "We're looking for information about a book," Sosa said, showing his badge. Don Nestor wiped his hands slowly. "Acá arreglo zapatos," he said mildly. "I fix shoes here. No vendo libros. I don't sell books." "No," Sosa agreed. "But there's a rumor about a back room." Don Nestor's eyes flicked to me, then back to Sosa. "Los rumores en San Telmo son como las palomas," he said. "Rumors in San Telmo are like pigeons. Siempre vuelven. They always return." Sosa's expression remained calm, but his voice sharpened. "A man is dead," he said. "In Plaza Dorrego. He was holding a book that doesn't belong to him." Don Nestor's fingers paused mid-wipe. For the first time, something like annoyance crossed his face. "La plaza siempre cobra," he said quietly. "The plaza always collects." "Don't play metaphors with me," Sosa said. Don Nestor shrugged, then nodded toward the beaded curtain. "Si quieren entrar, entren," he said. "If you want to enter, enter." He stepped aside. Sosa looked at me. "After you," he said. My mouth went dry. I pushed through the beads, their click sounding louder than before, and entered the narrow corridor. The encyclopedias still stood like a false tribunal. The hidden panel slid aside before I touched it, as if the room already knew we were coming. The woman sat at her table, ledger open, hands folded. She looked up, her eyes moving from me to Sosa with a calm that felt like power. "Inspector Tomás Sosa," she said, and my skin prickled. "Has rato que no venís," she added. "It's been a while since you've come." Sosa's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "Señora Manso," he replied. He knew her name. I felt the floor shift under my feet, not physically, but in my understanding. Of course he knew her. Of course this place wasn't just a rumor. It was a node, a secret institution, a trastienda in the city's own body. "We need to see your records," Sosa said. Celia Manso, because that was clearly who she was, tilted her head. "¿Qué registros?" she asked sweetly. "What records?" "Sales," Sosa said. "Purchases, names." Celia's smile was thin. "No vendemos alcohol," she said. "We don't sell alcohol. No necesitamos libros de actas. We don't need official books." "A man is dead," Sosa repeated. "His name is missing. The book he had—" "No estaba en la cuenta," Celia interrupted calmly. "He wasn't in the account." Sosa's eyes narrowed. "Then put him in it," he snapped. Celia's gaze slid to me. "Ella lo trajo," she said. "She brought him. I didn't—" I started, but Celia held up a hand. "No con tu cuerpo," she said, "not with your body. Con tu boleto, with your ticket." My stomach dropped. Sosa's gaze snapped to me. "What ticket?" he demanded. I hesitated, then pulled the train ticket from my bag with shaking fingers. Sosa took it, studied it. "It's dated tomorrow," he said, frowning. He flipped it over. "Retiro to Rosario Norte," he read. "Why do you have this?" "It was in a poetry book I bought there," I said, nodding toward the shoe stall outside as if it was safer to accuse leather and glue than paper and memory. Celia watched Sosa's face carefully. "Ese boleto se mueve," she said. "That ticket moves. Como una deuda," she added, "like a debt." Sosa's expression hardened. "Enough," he said. "I want the ledger." Celia tapped it with one finger. "Acá está," she said. "Here it is." "No te gusta lo que dice," she added. "You don't like what it says?" Sosa stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he would grab it. But his hand hovered inches above the leather and stopped, as if he'd encountered an invisible boundary. His fingers curled, then dropped. He looked at his own hand as if it had betrayed him. Celia's eyes gleamed faintly. "Todavía estás pagando," she murmured. "You're still paying." Sosa's face tightened with anger, and underneath it something else. Fear. He swallowed. "Show me the entries for today," he said, forcing his voice steady. Celia flipped pages with deliberate slowness, the paper whispering. She stopped and angled the ledger toward him. I leaned in despite myself. The date matched today. Under it, an entry in neat handwriting read, "Plaza Dorrego, banco, cliente sin nombre, pagó con mañana, no alcanzó. Cobrado, nombre y coartada, Plaza Dorrego, bench, client without name, paid with, tomorrow, it wasn't enough. Collected, name and alibi." My throat constricted. "He paid with tomorrow," I whispered, the words tasting like superstition. Celia nodded, as if confirming a receipt. "El boleto era su mañana," she said. The ticket was his tomorrow. "Lo sacó de su vida para comprar algo," she continued. "He took it out of his life to buy something." "¿Qué compró?" I asked, voice trembling. "What did he buy?" Celia's gaze slid to the shelves. "Un libro," she said simply. "A book. Uno que creyó que lo iba a salvar," she added. "One he thought would save him." Sosa's eyes flashed. "Which book?" he demanded. Celia didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached under the table and pulled out the slim volume of Fervor de Buenos Aires again. She placed it on the table, her hand resting on the cover. "Esto es lo que buscaba," she said. "This is what he was looking for." "He was looking for Borges," Sosa scoffed. "People don't die for poetry." Celia's smile was small and sharp. "No mueren por poesía," she agreed. "They don't die for poetry. Mueren por lo que la poesía puede esconder. They die for what poetry can hide." She opened the book to the dedication page and held it out, not to Sosa, but to me. My breath caught. The ink seemed darker today, the letters more alive. "No," I whispered, stepping back. "Don't," I said. Not sure if I meant don't show me or don't make me. Celia's voice softened. "Tu padre lo tocó," she said. "Your father touched it." Y por eso lo pudiste encontrar, she added. And that's why you could find it. Sosa's gaze snapped between us. What happens if you touch it? He demanded. Celia shrugged lightly. Recordas cosas, she said. You remember things. Cosas que no pasaron, she added. Things that didn't happen. Sosa's laugh was humorless. That's bullshit, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Celia held the book steady, eyes on me. Si quieres saber quién era el muerto, she said quietly, if you want to know who the dead man was, tienes que tocarlo. You have to touch it. My stomach churned. I looked at the ledger again. Client without name. Collected, name and alibi. He had become, on paper and in the city's memory, an absence. The police couldn't find his name because the ledger had taken it. This is insane, I whispered. But I could feel something in the room pulling, a current running under the floorboards. My father's notebook in my bag felt heavy, as if it too wanted answers. I thought of the dead hand clutching a book. I thought of the dedication in my poetry collection. For whoever finds this when they no longer remember me. What if the man on the bench had been trying not to be forgotten? What if the only way to restore his name was to accept someone else's false memory? I looked at Sosa. His face was tight, eyes wary. He wanted answers, but he also looked like someone who had once touched this world and paid. I looked at Celia. Her calm was terrifying, but her eyes held something like duty. And then, because grief makes you reckless and curiosity makes you brave in stupid ways, I reached out and placed 2 fingers on the dedication page of Fervor de Buenos Aires. The ink was dry, but the contact felt wet, like touching a fresh wound. The room vanished. I was standing on a platform at Retiro, but not the Retiro I knew from my subway rides and long-distance buses, not the modern bustle. This Retiro was older in texture, the iron and glass of the station looming like a cathedral. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp wool. Men in hats hurried past, women in long coats, their voices sharp with a different era's Spanish. A newspaper boy shouted headlines I couldn't quite catch, and beside me stood a man, his face half turned away, holding the same slim volume of Borges's poems. He looked around nervously, then pressed the book into someone's hands, into my hands. Guardalo, he whispered. Keep it. Si me borran, esto queda, he said. If they erase, me this stays. His eyes flicked to my face, and recognition flared as if he knew me from a life I hadn't lived. Valentina, he said softly, and hearing my name in his mouth in that place made my chest ache. Decile a Andrés que no confía en Sosa, he whispered urgently. Tell Andrés not to trust Sosa. The name hit like a punch. My father, Andrés. The scene lurched. Suddenly I was in Plaza Dorrego, but the plaza looked different. Less touristy, more raw. The cafes were still there, but the tables were fewer, the people rougher. A man played guitar near the corner. The air was thick with cigarette smoke. A young woman danced tango with a man whose hands were too tight on her waist, her smile forced. And on the bench, there was the same man from Retiro, older now, his face drawn. He clutched a book with the keyhole symbol. A uniformed policeman approached, different uniform than today, older style. The policeman's face shifted and became Inspector Tomas Sosa, but younger, his eyes colder. Sosa leaned down, spoke to the man on the bench. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the man's mouth form them. No me saques el nombre. Don't take my name. Sosa's hand moved, and the man flinched as if struck. The world blurred. I saw a ledger open on a table. I saw Celia's hands turning pages. I saw my father, younger, writing in a notebook. I saw the beaded curtain, the encyclopedias, the false wall. I saw a woman's face scratched out in a photograph. Then, with a jolt, I was back in the room, my fingers still on the page, my breath ragged. The ink on the dedication seemed to pulse faintly, like a vein. I jerked my hand back, shaking. What did you see? Sosa demanded, his voice tight. I swallowed hard. A man, I whispered. On a platform. Retiro. He gave me the book. I looked at Celia, my eyes burning. He knew my name, I said. He told me to tell my father not to trust Sosa. Silence slammed down. Sosa's face went pale, then flushed. That's impossible, he said sharply. It's a memory, Celia said calmly. Prestada, she added. Borrowed. Sosa's hands curled into fists. "Enough of this," he snapped. "I'm taking the book. I'm taking the ledger. This is evidence." He reached for the ledger again, and again his hand stopped short, fingers trembling as if against glass. He snarled, frustration and fear mixing. "What did you do to me?" he hissed at Celia. Celia's eyes were steady. "Nada que vos no hayas pedido," she said. "Nothing you didn't ask for." "Vos viniste," she reminded him. "You came." "Vos pagaste," she said. "You paid." Sosa's jaw clenched. "For what?" he spat. Celia's gaze flicked to the ledger. "Por tu coartada," she said softly. "For your alibi." The word hung in the air like smoke. My stomach turned. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. Celia looked at me, and for the first time her calm cracked into something like sorrow. "Significa que hay cosas que hiciste," she said. "It means there are things you did." She nodded towards Sosa. "Y cosas que él hizo," she added. "And things he did. Y que ninguno de los dos quiere recordar. And that neither of you wants to remember." Sosa's eyes flashed. "I don't need your psychology," he snapped. "I need facts." Celia's smile was thin. "Acá los hechos se escriben," she said. "Here facts are written. Y se borran," she added, and erased. I felt suddenly nauseous. The borrowed memory had shown me Sosa taking something from the man on the bench. His name, his plea. The ledger had recorded collected. Name and alibi. Sosa had bought an alibi, which meant he had traded something away. Maybe his own memory of what he'd done. Maybe his own name in some context. "Who was the man?" I asked, voice trembling. "The one on the bench." Celia's gaze softened toward me. "Se llamaba Héctor Lamas," she said quietly. His name was Hector Lamas. The name felt like a key turning in a lock. As soon as she said it, my mind tried to fill in details, to attach a person to the name. I saw faintly the man's face again, his anxious eyes. "Why was his name taken?" I asked. "Because he wanted it gone?" Celia shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "Él quería quedarse," she added. He wanted to remain. "Quería que alguien lo recordara," she said. He wanted someone to remember him. "Pero no tenía con qué pagar," she continued. But he didn't have enough to pay. "Entonces pagó con mañana," she said. So he paid with tomorrow. She nodded toward the ticket, still in Sosa's hand. "Te dejó el boleto," she added. "He left you the ticket. Para que vos tengas su mañana," she said. So you would have his tomorrow. My chest tightened. "Why me?" I whispered. Celia's eyes held mine. "Porque tu padre le debía algo," she said. "Because your father owed him something." The words hit me like a wave. My father owed a man, named Héctor Lamas, something. A debt recorded not in money, but in memory and days. "What did my father do?" I asked, voice cracking. Celia glanced toward the small room with my father's notebook. "Le sacó un nombre," she said softly. He took a name from him. "Para salvar a otro," she added, "to save someone else." I swallowed hard. In my father's box of papers there were lists of names, some crossed out. Names I'd assumed were literary references. Now they felt like ghosts. Sosa's face contorted with anger. "This is bullshit," he repeated. But the word alibi had rattled him. "If Lamas is dead," he said, forcing logic, "then who killed him?" Celia's gaze slid to him coolly. "De verdad querés saber?" she asked. "Do you really want to know?" Sosa hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw a man who had built a life on not knowing. "Yes," he said finally, and his voice sounded like it hurt. Celia nodded once, as if granting a request she couldn't refuse. She opened the ledger to another page, one that made my skin prickle before I even read it. She turned it toward me, not Sosa. "Lee," she said. "Read." I leaned in. The entry was dated years ago, written in the same neat hand, 1978, T. Sosa, nombre de un desaparecido, cobrado, coartada. 1978, T. Sosa, name of a disappeared person, collected, alibi. I froze. The year slammed into me with the weight of history. 1978. The dictatorship years, the years of disappeared people, of names erased from records, of mothers walking in circles in Plaza de Mayo demanding to know where their children were. My stomach turned. I looked up at Sosa. His face had gone rigid, eyes locked on the ledger as if on a weapon. This is not admissible, he said hoarsely. This is not es tu letra, Celia said softly. It's your handwriting. Sosa's mouth opened and closed. I was a child, he whispered, then shook his head sharply. No, he said, voice rising. No, I wasn't even born then. The denial sounded desperate, but it was also a fact. He looked 40, which meant he'd been born after 1978. The ledger had recorded something impossible. Celia's eyes were steady. Los nombres viajan, she said. Names travel. Las coartadas también, she added. Alibis, too. She tapped the ledger. Tu nombre no es solo tuyo, she said. Your name isn't only yours. Sosa's breathing quickened. What are you saying? He demanded. That my father... Que alguien usó tu nombre, Celia said. That someone used your name. Como se usa un traje, she added, like a suit. The room seemed to shrink. I thought of the dedication's shifting signature. I thought of the ledger's entries, name collected, name traded, names as currency, names as masks. I looked at the Fervor de Buenos Aires book again. Its dedication, for the city that invented me, suddenly felt less poetic and more literal. Who wrote the dedication? I asked, my voice barely audible. Celia's gaze slid to the book. El que no pudo quedarse con su nombre, she said, the one who couldn't keep his name. Hector, I whispered, and my chest ached. Celia nodded. Hector Lamas, she confirmed. Pero no con ese nombre, she added, but not with that name. Sosa slammed his fist onto the table, making the books tremble on the shelves. Stop, he snarled. I don't care about your metaphysical bullshit. A man is dead. Who killed him? Celia's eyes hardened. Vos, she said simply. You. The word landed like a gunshot. Sosa went still. No, he whispered. No, he repeated, louder as if volume could change reality. I was in my office. He stopped, and I saw it. The instinct to say alibi, the way the word rose like a shield. But then he remembered Celia's earlier accusation. You paid for your alibi. If he'd bought it here, then his certainty about his own whereabouts was rented. I didn't, he said, voice shaking now. I didn't. Celia's gaze didn't waver. No con tus manos, she said, not with your hands. Con tu deuda, she added, with your debt. La coartada que compraste necesitaba un cuerpo, she said. The alibi you bought needed a body. Y el cuerpo fue el de Héctor, she finished, and the body was Héctor's. My mouth went dry. That doesn't make sense, I whispered, but it did. In the sick way the ledger made sense. If you bought an alibi, someone else might have to lose theirs. If you erased your guilt, someone else might carry it. Celia leaned back slightly, as if the truth exhausted her. Héctor vino anoche, she said. Héctor came last night. Quería recuperar su nombre, she continued. He wanted to recover his name. Quería que el libro lo devolviera, she said. He wanted the book to return it. Pero el libro no devuelve, Celia said softly. But the book doesn't return. El libro toma, she said, and her voice lowered. The book takes. I felt cold creep over my skin. So why show it to me? I asked, voice trembling. Why involve me? Celia's gaze held mine. Porque vos podés pagar distinto, she said quietly, because you can pay differently. Tu padre te dejó algo que no es plata, she said. Your father left you something that isn't money. She nodded toward my bag where the notebook and the key sat heavy. Te dejó una llave, she said. He left you a key. Y te dejó un hueco, she added. And he left you a hollow, a missing space. I swallowed. He took my first love's name, I whispered, the absurdity of it suddenly tragic. Celia nodded. Un hueco pequeño, she said. A small hollow. Los huecos grandes cuestan más, she added. Big hollows cost more. Sosa's voice was hoarse. If I'm responsible, he said, and the words sounded like they were tearing out of him, then prove it. Prove it in a way that matters. Celia's eyes narrowed slightly. Para quién? She asked. For whom? For the law, she asked, and her tone made it sound like a joke. Or for you? Sosa swallowed. For me, he said finally, and his shoulders sagged as if admitting it was the first honest thing he'd said in years. Celia nodded once. Entonces tenés que recordar, she said. Then you have to remember. Sosa flinched. No, he whispered instinctively. Celia's eyes were merciless. Si, she said. Yes. She looked at me. Y vos también, she added. And you too. Because Hector left you his tomorrow, she said, switching to English for the first time, her accent precise. And tomorrow comes with interest. The phrase sent a pulse of dread through me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out. A notification from an email account I hadn't checked in years. My father's old address, still somehow active. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a time and place. 0655 Retiro. And beneath it, a single sentence. No dejes que te cobren tu nombre. Don't let them collect your name. My hands shook. We have to go, I said suddenly, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. To Retiro, I added. Sosa looked at me sharply. Why? He demanded. Because the ticket is for tomorrow, I said, and my mind raced. Because Hector gave it to me. Because my father. I swallowed hard. Because someone is going to be on that train, I said, the words forming as I spoke. Someone who shouldn't be. Celia watched me with an expression that was almost approval. Ahora entendés, she murmured. Now you understand. Who? Sosa demanded, turning to Celia. Who are we looking for? Celia's gaze slid to the dedication page of Fervor de Buenos Aires, to the shifting signature. El que usó tu nombre, she said softly. The one who used your name. Sosa's face tightened. The one from 1978, he whispered. Celia nodded. Un nombre puede durar más que un cuerpo, she said. A name can last longer than a body. Y un cuerpo puede ser prestado, she added. And a body can be borrowed. My skin crawled. Sosa looked at the ticket again, then at me. We go, he said abruptly, snapping into action as if motion could keep him from drowning in the ledger's truths. Now. We left La Trastienda de Papel behind, the beads clicking as we passed, the shoe stall's leather smell rushing in like a relief that didn't relieve anything. Don Nestor watched us go, his eyes unreadable. Ojo, he called after me. Careful. No te olvides de quién sos, he added. Don't forget who you are. The phrase hit me like a threat and a blessing. We took a taxi because Buenos Aires traffic is its own labyrinth and you don't argue with time when time is what's being traded. As we crossed the city toward Retiro, the streets shifted from the low colonial feel of San Telmo to the wider avenues downtown. We passed Avenida 9 de Julio with its obelisks stabbing the gray sky, past offices and kiosks, past people walking quickly with heads down as if the city's weight was on their necks. Sosa sat beside me in the back seat, jaw tight, eyes forward. He looked like a man trying to remember a dream he'd spent his life avoiding. Tell me everything you saw when you touched the dedication, he said suddenly, voice low. I hesitated. It wasn't all clear, I admitted. It was like someone else's memories were shoved into my head, I said, pressing my fingers to my temple as if I could hold them there. Retiro, old-looking people in hats, and then Plaza Dorrego, but not like today. Sosa's eyes flicked to me. And me, he said. You saw me, I swallowed. I saw someone who looked like you, I said carefully. But younger, maybe not even you, maybe your name. Sosa flinched, as if the idea hurt more than accusation. My name, he muttered. If someone used it, he said slowly, then I've been living under a borrowed shadow. Or you bought the shadow, I said before I could stop myself, and the words hung between us. Sosa's face tightened, but he didn't snap. He looked tired suddenly, older. You don't know what it's like to grow up here, he said quietly. To grow up with fathers who didn't talk, mothers who looked away, teachers who told you to forget because forgetting was safer. His voice roughened. People think the dictatorship ended and everything returned to normal, he said. But normal was built on silence, he added, and silence is a kind of alibi. I stared at him, my chest tight. My father never stopped talking, I said softly, but he talked in riddles. Sosa's mouth twisted. That's another way of staying alive, he said. The taxi pulled into the chaos of Retiro. The station area bustled even in the early morning, with buses, commuters, people dragging suitcases, vendors selling coffee and media lunas. The long-distance train platforms were a world of their own, fluorescent lights, metal benches, the smell of oil and damp concrete. We moved through the crowd with purpose. Sosa flashed his badge at a security guard who waved us through with the weary compliance of someone who knows authority is often just another costume. We reached the platform listed on the ticket. The train to Rosario Norte stood waiting. Silver cars lined up like patient animals. People clustered near doors, checking phones, chatting quietly. It was not a romantic scene, not a Borges-like cathedral, just modern transit. And yet, I felt the hair on my arms rise as if the air itself was charged. "There," Sosa murmured suddenly. He nodded toward a man standing slightly apart from the others, near a column. The man wore a dark coat, a scarf wrapped neatly, his posture composed. He held no suitcase, only a slim book in his hand. Even from a distance, I recognized the modest cover. Fervor de Buenos Aires. My stomach clenched. The man turned his head slightly, and though his face was partially shadowed, something about him made my mind want to slide away, as if looking directly would be painful. "Who is that?" I whispered. Sosa's jaw clenched. "I don't know," he said, "but I know that book shouldn't be here." We moved toward the man, weaving through the crowd. As we approached, the man's head turned fully, and his gaze landed on me with a calm that made my blood run cold. His eyes were pale, almost gray. He smiled faintly, as if we were late to an appointment. "Valentina," he said softly, and the way he said it made my name feel like something he'd used before. Sosa stepped forward. "Police," he said sharply. "Show me your ID." The man chuckled softly. "Mi nombre?" he asked. "My name." "Cuál querés?" he added. "Which one do you want?" Sosa's hand went to his belt reflexively. "Don't play games," he snapped. The man lifted the book slightly. "No son juegos," he said. "They're not games." "Son cuentas," he added. "They're accounts." My chest tightened. The man's gaze remained on me. "Tu padre me debe," he said quietly. "Your father owes me." Anger flared in me, hot and sudden. "My father is dead," I snapped. "Then you're the payment," the man replied simply, and the casual cruelty of it made my breath catch. Sosa lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm. The man didn't resist, didn't even tense. He looked at Sosa with mild curiosity. "Tomás," he said, and Sosa froze. The way the man said it carried familiarity, as if calling a dog. Sosa's grip tightened. "Don't call me that," he hissed. The man smiled faintly. "Ese nombre te queda grande," he said. "That name is too big for you." Sosa's face flushed with rage. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man's eyes flicked to the train where a conductor blew a whistle. The doors would close soon. Time was moving forward the way it always does, indifferent to mysteries. "Soy el que se quedó con los nombres que ustedes tiraron," the man said softly. "I'm the one who kept the names you threw away." My stomach churned. "You're from the ledger," I whispered, and the man's smile widened slightly. "La señora Manso sigue haciendo negocios," he said. "Mrs. Manso keeps doing business." "But she doesn't own the debt," he continued, eyes on me. "Your father did something," he said, voice low, "in 1978. And the year hit me like a hammer. "He took a name to protect someone," the man said, "and he promised he'd return it," he added. "He never did." I swallowed hard. "What name?" I whispered. The man's gaze sharpened. "You don't get it," he said softly. "Names aren't just labels," he said. "They're doors." He tapped the book's cover. "This book is a door," he said, "and your father used it like a key." Sosa's grip on the man's arm tightened. "Enough," he snarled. "You're coming with me." The man glanced at the train doors, now closing. "No puedo," he said. "I can't." "Tengo mañana," he added, his eyes flicking to me. "I have tomorrow." My stomach dropped. He had the tickets tomorrow, or he wanted it. "I have the ticket," I said, pulling it from my pocket with shaking fingers. The paper felt hot now, as if alive. "It's mine," I said, not sure if I meant legally or metaphysically. The man's gaze locked onto the ticket, hunger flickering across his calm for the first time. "No es tuyo," he said softly. "It's not yours." "Es de Héctor," he said. "It belongs to Héctor." "And Héctor is dead," I snapped, my voice shaking. The man's expression hardened slightly. "Héctor está muerto porque ustedes lo mataron muchas veces," he said quietly. "Héctor is dead because you killed him many times. Cada vez que le sacaron el nombre," he added. "Every time you took his name." My throat constricted. The conductor called out again. The train was about to depart. Sosa's eyes darted, calculating. "We arrest him now," he said, but his voice sounded less certain. "We take him off the platform." The man laughed softly. "Y a dónde me llevas?" he asked. "And where will you take me?" "A una celda," Sosa snapped. The man's smile was pitying. "Las celdas son para cuerpos con nombres," he said. "Cells are for bodies with names." He leaned closer to me, ignoring Sosa's grip as if it were irrelevant. "Valentina," he said softly, "tu padre te dejó una llave," and my chest tightened. "Esa llave abre la página que falta," he said. "That key opens the missing page. La página donde está el nombre que él robó," he whispered. "The page where the name he stole is." "Damala," he said, his voice turning sharp. "Give it to me." My hand went instinctively to my bag where the key was, my father's key. The weight of it felt suddenly enormous. "No," I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. The man's eyes narrowed. "Entonces te voy a cobrar," he said softly. "Then I'm going to collect from you." Before I could react, he reached, not for my pocket, not for the ticket, but for my face. His fingers brushed my temple, light as a moth, and the world fractured. I saw my mother's face, young, smiling, calling me by a nickname I hadn't heard in years. I felt the warmth of her hand on my forehead when I had a fever at 6. I smelled her perfume. And then, as if someone had torn a page out of my mind, it vanished. I gasped, stumbling back. "What did you do?" I choked. The man's expression was calm again. "Un recuerdo," he said. "A memory." "No era caro," he added. It wasn't expensive. Rage surged through me, raw and helpless. Sosa reacted faster than my anger, shoving the man hard. The man stumbled, and his grip on the book loosened. The slim volume slipped from his hand, fell to the platform with a slap. Instinctively, I lunged for it. My fingers closed around the cover, and this time the jolt was stronger, like grabbing a live wire. The platform vanished, and I was in a different retiro again. The older one, coal smoke, hats, winter air. Hector stood before me, younger, his eyes desperate. "No le de tu nombre," he pleaded. "Don't give him your name." "Te va vaciar," he said. "He'll empty you." "Usa la llave," Hector urged, pressing something cold into my palm. The key. My father's key. "La página que falta," Hector whispered. "The missing page." The scene shifted and I saw my father, Andrés, at a desk in the back room of La Trastienda de Papel, writing furiously. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Perdóname," he whispered. "Forgive me." "No supe como devolverlo," he said. I didn't know how to return it. He held up the key, then slid it into a hidden compartment in the book's spine. The spine opened like a mouth, revealing a folded sheet tucked inside. A page not part of the printed book, handwritten. On it, a name. A disappeared person's name, written carefully, as if writing it could bring them back. The name burned in my vision. I tried to read it, to hold it, but the letters blurred, shifting like the signature had. Then the world snapped back, and I was on the modern platform again, clutching the book, breath ragged. The man, whoever he was, stared at me with sudden fury. "No," he snarled. "Es libro es mío." That book is mine. The train doors beeped. The train began to move, slow at first. The crowd surged, people stepping back. Sosa grabbed the man again, but the man twisted with surprising strength, shoving Sosa aside. He lunged toward me, eyes wild. "Dame la llave," he hissed. "Give me the key." I stumbled backward, clutching the book to my chest. My bag swung, and the zipper gaped. The key slid out, bounced once on the platform with a bright metallic sound. The man's eyes locked onto it like a predator. He dove. I dove too. Our fingers reached at the same time. My hand closed around the key, and in that instant, a memory slammed. Into me, not mine, not borrowed like before, but something raw and heavy. A cramped room, blindfolds, a woman sobbing, a man shouting questions, the smell of sweat and fear. A voice, cold, saying, "Borrale el nombre." Erase her name. My stomach heaved. I clutched the key and pushed myself upright, shaking. Sosa grabbed my arm. "Valentina," he panted. "We leave. Now." The man rose too, his face contorted. He reached into his coat and pulled something out. Not a gun, but a small stamp, the kind used in the back room. He thrust it toward me. "Tim Marco," he snarled. "I mark you." He slammed it toward my wrist. Sosa lunged between us, and the stamp landed on Sosa's hand instead. The stamp made a dull thud, like hitting flesh, and Sosa cried out, jerking back. On his skin, a dark ink impression bloomed, a keyhole inside a circle. Sosa stared at it, horror dawning. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The man's smile returned, thin and triumphant. "Ahora sí estás en la cuenta," he said softly. "Now you're in the account." Sosa's breathing turned ragged, his eyes unfocused for a second, as if a curtain had been pulled away inside his head. Then he gagged and doubled over, one hand gripping his stamped skin, the other gripping the edge of a column. "I remember," he whispered, voice breaking. "I remember," he repeated, and tears sprang into his eyes, shocking in a man who had seemed made of control. The man leaned in close to Sosa, almost tender. "Decime mi nombre," he whispered. "Tell me my name." Sosa shook his head violently. "No," he choked. "I won't," he gasped. "I won't give it back." The man's expression hardened. "Entonces te quedas con el peso," he said. "Then you keep the weight." He turned toward me, eyes burning. "Y vos," he said. "Vos me lo vas a devolver." "And you're going to return it to me." I backed away, clutching the key and the book, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. The train to Rosario was already pulling away, gaining speed, its windows flashing by like frames of a film. Tomorrow leaving without us, or with us, depending on whose tomorrow it was. "Run!" Sosa rasped suddenly, looking up at me with bloodshot eyes. "Get out!" he said. "Go back to Manso!" he gasped. "She's the only one who can—" He stopped, choking on a sob. "I did it," he whispered. "I did something," he said, shaking. "And I paid to forget," he said, voice cracking. "And now it's back." The man laughed softly. "Nada vuelve gratis," he said. "Nothing returns for free." A security guard shouted. People started to notice the commotion. The man slipped backward into the crowd with the ease of someone who didn't need a face to move through bodies. For a second our eyes met and I felt the chill of a promise. Then he was gone. Sosa grabbed my sleeve with trembling fingers. "Listen," he rasped. "The ledger," he said. "It doesn't record sales," he said, eyes wild. "It records what's taken," he said, and the fact that he'd finally said it out loud felt like a door opening somewhere. "Memories, alibis, names," he whispered. "And the dead man in Plaza Dorrego," he said, swallowing hard. "Hector Lamas. He paid with tomorrow and lost his name," he said, tears streaking his face. "And my alibi," he whispered. "My God, my alibi," he said, and his voice broke completely. I stood there shaking, clutching the key that felt like a piece of ice, the book heavy in my hands. My mother's stolen fever memory left a cold hollow in my chest, a missing warmth I could feel but not reach. The platform noise swelled around us, announcements, footsteps, distant horns, but it all sounded muffled as if I were underwater. Sosa looked at me with a desperation that made him suddenly human. "Your father," he whispered. "He tried to fix it," he said. "He tried," he repeated, and his stamped hand trembled. "He left you because he couldn't," Sosa said, swallowing hard. "And now," he breathed, "it's you." I nodded once, though my head felt full of fog. "We go back," I said, voice shaking. "To La Trastienda," I said, and the words tasted like surrender and purpose. We made it out of Retiro in a blur, Sosa half stumbling, me half dragging him, the stamp on his hand dark as a bruise. In the taxi back to San Telmo, he stared at his stamped skin as if it were a map. "I thought I was clean," he whispered. "I thought I'd paid," he said. But it was always there, he murmured, under the surface. I looked out the window as the city passed, feeling the hollow where my mother's fever hand should have been. Maybe paying doesn't erase, I said quietly. Maybe it just moves, I said, thinking of the ticket that stayed one day ahead, thinking of names traveling like suits. Sosa let out a broken laugh. That's what she told you, he murmured. Manso, he said. She always says nothing disappears, he whispered. It's just stored. When we reached the shoe stall, Don Nestor took one look at Sosa's hand and hissed through his teeth. Mira lo que te hicieron, he muttered. Look what they did to you. Sosa didn't answer. He pushed through the beads like a man entering his own sentence. Inside, Celia Manso sat as if she'd never moved. The ledger lay open. Her gaze slid to Sosa's stamped hand, and something like resignation crossed her face. Volvio, she said softly. It returned. Sosa stumbled to the table, slammed his stamped hand down on the ledger so hard the pages fluttered. Fix it, he rasped. Fix this, he said, voice shaking. Celia looked at his hand, then at me, then at the slim book clutched to my chest. Trajiste el libro, she said. You brought the book. I nodded, swallowing hard. And the key, I said, pulling it from my fist. The metal was slick with sweat. Celia's eyes sharpened. Isa Lave, she murmured. That key. She reached for it, but I pulled it back reflexively. No, I said, voice trembling. Not until you tell me the truth, I said. All of it, I insisted. Celia studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Está bien, she said. All right. She gestured to the ledger. Tu padre vino acá en los 90, she began. Your father came here in the 90s. Buscaba un nombre, she said. He was looking for a name. Un nombre que había desaparecido de los registros, she continued. A name that had disappeared from records. Lo quería devolver, she said. He wanted to return it. Porque sin el nombre, la familia no podía reclamar nada, she explained. Because without the name, the family couldn't claim anything. Ni cuerpo, ni historia, she added. No body, no story. Sosa's breathing hitched. Celia's voice remained steady. En esos años, she said, in those years, mucha gente vino a pagar para olvidar, she said. Many people came to pay to forget. Policías, militares, jueces, she said. Police, military, judges. Y también madres, she added, and also mothers. Madres que querían recordar lo suficiente para seguir buscando, she said softly. Mothers who wanted to remember enough to keep searching. My throat tightened. So what did my father do? I asked. Celia's gaze slid to the book. El libro, she said. The book. Fervor de Buenos Aires, she said, touching the cover lightly, careful not to open it. No es solo un libro, she said. It's not just a book. Es un contenedor, she said. It's a container. Un lugar donde se guardan cosas, she added, a place where things are stored. La dedicatoria, she said, es como una puerta, she added, her eyes flicking to the shifting ink. The dedication is like a door. La tocas, she said, y entras en lo que alguien dejó adentro, she explained. You touch it, and you enter what someone left inside. I swallowed, thinking of the cold smoke retiro, of Hector's desperate eyes, of the torture room flash that had made me gag. Héctor Lamas era un mensajero, Celia continued. Héctor Lamas was a messenger. Un hombre que llevaba cosas de un lado a otro, she said. A man who carried things from one place to another. Nombres, papeles, photos, she said. Names, papers, photos. Lo hizo durante la dictadura, she said, and my stomach turned. He did it during the dictatorship. A veces para ayudar, a veces para sobrevivir, she added. Sometimes to help, sometimes to survive. Un día, she said. Él trajo un nombre acá, she continued. One day he brought a name here. Para esconderlo, she said. To hide it. Para que no lo borraran, she said. So they wouldn't erase it. Pero alguien lo encontró, she said softly. But someone found it. Y pagó para sacarlo, she added, and paid to take it. Sosa's stamped hand trembled on the ledger. Who? He whispered. Celia's eyes flicked to him. Un hombre sin cara, she said. A man without a face. Un hombre que usaba nombres como zapatos, she said. A man who used names like shoes. Don Nestor, standing near the doorway, let out a soft sound of disgust. Ese hijo de puta, he muttered. That son of a bitch. He's the one on the platform, I whispered, my mouth dry. Celia nodded. Él compró el nombre, she said. He bought the name. Y dejó otro en su lugar, she added, and left another in its place. ¿Cuál? I asked, voice trembling. Which? Celia's gaze slid to Sosa. El tuyo, she said softly. Yours. Sosa flinched as if struck. No, he whispered. So my name? He swallowed hard. My name is an exchange, he said, horror in his voice. Celia nodded once. Una coartada, she said, an alibi. Una identidad prestada, she added, a borrowed identity. My mind raced. If Sosa's name had been used as an exchange, then his entire life might have been built on a debt he didn't understand. And my father? I pressed. Celia's eyes softened slightly. Tu padre se enteró, she said. Your father found out. Y quiso devolver el nombre original, she said. And he wanted to return the original name. Pero para devolverlo, she said. Tenía que pagar, she added. But to return it, he had to pay. Y el precio era alto, she said quietly, and the price was high. What did he pay? I asked, voice cracking. Celia looked at me with something like regret. Pagó con años, she said softly. He paid with years. Pagó con recuerdos que no te contó, she said. He paid with memories he didn't tell you. Pagó con su posibilidad de volver, she added, and the phrase made my chest ache. He paid with his ability to return. I thought of his life in Queens, his restlessness, his longing for a city he described like a lover. And Hector, I whispered. Celia's jaw tightened. Hector pagó con su nombre, she said. Hector paid with his name. Y eso lo fue borrando, she said, and that erased him. Hasta que solo quedó el libro, she finished, until only the book remained. Sosa's voice was raw. And he died on the bench, he whispered. Celia nodded. Porque vino a reclamar, she said, because he came to claim. Y el hombre sin cara lo siguió, she added, and the faceless man followed him. Héctor intentó pagar con mañana, she said, nodding toward the ticket. Héctor tried to pay with tomorrow. Pero el hombre sin cara no quería mañana, she said softly. But the faceless man didn't want tomorrow. Quería el nombre que estaba escondido, she said, eyes on the book. He wanted the name that was hidden. My pulse hammered. The missing page, I whispered, remembering the vision of my father sliding the key into the spine, the hidden compartment opening like a mouth. Celia nodded. La página que tu padre escondió, she said. The page your father hid. La llave la abre, she said. The key opens it. I held the key tighter, feeling its cold bite. And if I open it, I asked, voice trembling, what happens? Celia's eyes held mine. El nombre vuelve, she said simply. The name returns. Y cuando un nombre vuelve, she added, la cuenta se mueve, she said. And when a name returns, the account shifts. People remember, I whispered. Celia nodded. Y algunos no lo soportan, she said. And some can't bear it. Sosa's stamped hand shook. Do it, he rasped, desperation in his eyes. Open it, he said. Bring it back, he pleaded. Maybe it will fix, he stammered. But he didn't know what fix meant anymore. My mouth went dry. My mother's stolen fever memory hollowed my chest, and my first love's name was still gone, a blank where a person had been. I understood then what Celia meant by paying differently. I could pay in the small ways, names, details, comforts, or I could pay in the big way. I could give up something foundational. If I open it, I said slowly. The faceless man will come, I said, more statement than question. Celia's lips pressed together. Si, she said. Yes. Don Nestor shifted, his hands clenching and unclenching. Ya está viniendo, he muttered. He's already coming. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier, as if paper could hold its breath. Outside, faintly, a bandoneon phrase rose and then broke off, like someone stopping mid-sentence. I looked at the ledger, at its columns of collected memories and names. I understood now the prompt my father had left me without explicitly writing it. The ledger didn't record what was sold. It recorded what was taken. It was a map of absences, a catalogue of the city's little hollows. And if I wanted to stop the faceless man from continuing to wear names like shoes, I had to reverse a transaction that had been running for decades. I set Fervor de Buenos Aires on the table with trembling hands. Celia moved her hands away, giving me space. I took the key and slid it into the spine exactly where my vision had shown. There was a soft click, like a lock finally admitting it had always been waiting. The spine opened slightly, revealing a folded sheet tucked inside. My breath hitched. I pulled the sheet out carefully. It was thin, handwritten, the ink slightly faded, but legible. A single name written in careful script. I stared at it, and for a moment the letters blurred, trying to escape me. I leaned closer, forcing focus. The name resolved, Eleanor Bethlehem. The surname hit me strangely. Bethlehem, like the little street beside Plaza Dorrego, like the nearby church of Nuestra Señora de Bethlehem. A name tied to place, to faith, to history. Elena, I whispered, and as soon as I said it, the room shuddered, not physically but in the way reality shudders when a truth is spoken. My mind flooded with images that weren't mine. A woman with dark hair walking quickly through San Telmo in 1978. Clutching papers to her chest, fear in her eyes, hands grabbing her, a scream cut off, a mother crying, a child's toy left on a table. My stomach heaved. Sosa made a choking sound, his eyes rolling back for a second as if overwhelmed. Don Nestor crossed himself quickly, muttering under his breath. Celia closed her eyes briefly, as if in prayer or pain. And then from the corridor beyond the false encyclopedias, the beaded curtain clicked, slowly, deliberately, like someone tapping a fingernail on glass. A voice drifted in, calm and amused. "Que lindo," it said. "How nice." The faceless man stepped into the room, but his face was clearer now, as if the return name had forced definition. He looked older up close, lines around his mouth, a scar near his eyebrow, his eyes fixed on the paper in my hand. "Al fin," he murmured, finally. "Dámelo," he said, voice gentle, and the gentleness was the most frightening part. "Give it to me!" My hands shook, but I held on. "It's not yours," I said, my voice trembling. The man's smile widened faintly. "Todo nombre es de quien lo usa," he said. "Every name belongs to whoever uses it." Sosa stepped forward shakily, stamped hand raised like a shield. "No," he rasped. "No more," he said, voice breaking. The man's gaze flicked to Sosa's hand, and he chuckled softly. "Te queda bien," he said. "It suits you." "You killed Héctor," I said, forcing the words out. The man's eyes flicked to me, amused. "Héctor se murió solo," he said. "Héctor died alone. Porque se quedó sin mañana," he added, nodding toward the absent ticket. "Because he ran out of tomorrow." My throat tightened. "You took his name," I said. The man shrugged lightly. "Me lo vendió," he replied. "He sold it to me." "He didn't want to," I snapped. The man's smile turned sharp. "Nadie quiere," he said. "Nobody wants to." "Pero todos pagan," he added. "But everyone pays." I felt rage and grief twist together inside me. "Then take mine," I said suddenly, and the words came out before I could think. The room went still. Celia's eyes snapped to me, alarm flaring. Don Nestor made a sound of protest. Sosa's head jerked toward me. The faceless man's smile widened slowly. "Ah," he murmured, "eso es generosidad," he said. "That's generosity." "Or stupidity," I said, voice shaking. "But if you want a name," I said, lifting the paper slightly. "You can have mine," I repeated. "Not this one," I said. "This one goes back to Elena," I said. And as I spoke, the images in my head sharpened. Elena's fear, her mother's grief, the child's toy left behind. The faceless man's eyes narrowed. "Tu nombre no me serve," he said. "Your name doesn't serve me." "You've used it before," I said, and Sosa flinched. "You used Tomas Sosa like a suit," I said. "You can use Valentina Rivas," I said, voice trembling but steadying. "But you don't get Elena," I said. The man tilted his head, considering, and in that moment he looked like a businessman, like any man in Buenos Aires who negotiates, who weighs, who calculates. "¿Ay que me ofreces?" he asked softly. "And what do you offer me?" My throat tightened. I felt the hollows inside me. My first love's name missing, my mother's fever hand missing. What else could I give? Something big, something foundational. I thought of Don Nestor's warning, "Don't forget who you are." I thought of my father's email, Don't let them collect your name. And I realized the only thing I could offer that might satisfy and also trap him was not my name, but my alibi. I offer you my certainty, I said slowly, and the man's eyes narrowed. My story, I said. I offer you the version of me that makes sense, I continued, voice shaking. Take it, I said. Take my alibi, I finished, and the word felt like stepping off a ledge. Celia's breath caught sharply. Sosa's eyes widened. The faceless man's smile returned, delighted. Eso sí, he murmured. That, yes. He stepped closer, and the air around him smelled faintly of ink. Damelo, he whispered. Give it to me. I closed my eyes because I couldn't bear to see his hand touch me, and I felt his fingers press lightly to my sternum, as if finding a pulse. For a moment I felt a tug, a pulling, like a thread being drawn out. Images flashed. My life in Brooklyn, my father's kitchen in Queens, my plane landing at Ezeiza, my footsteps in San Telmo. Then something snapped and the images fell away like a dropped deck of cards. I gasped, eyes flying open. The room swam. The faceless man stepped back satisfied. Listo, he said, done. I swayed and Celia reached out to steady me, but I pulled away instinctively, not trusting anyone's touch. Now, the man said, eyes on the paper. El nombre, he murmured, the name. I shook my head, though my vision blurred. No, I whispered, clutching the paper tighter. The man's eyes narrowed. Mi pagaste, he said softly. You paid me. I paid you to leave, I said, though the words felt slippery, as if my own reasoning was dissolving. And to stop, I added. The man laughed softly. Nadie paga para que yo pare, he said. Nobody pays for me to stop. Pagan para que yo siga, pero en otro cuerpo, he said, and the sentence chilled me. They pay so I continue, but in another body. My stomach dropped. He was going to use what he'd taken from me, the alibi, the coherence, to slip into my life, to wear me like a suit. Panic surged. No, I choked. Celia's eyes widened, understanding. Valentina, she whispered urgently. No era eso, she said. That wasn't it. Don Nestor lunged forward suddenly, faster than his thin body should have allowed. He grabbed the faceless man's wrist, twisting hard, and with his other hand he yanked a strip of leather from his pocket. Shoe leather, thick and tough. He wrapped it around the man's wrist like a restraint. Acá se termina, Don Nestor snarled. It ends here. The faceless man's eyes flashed with anger, and he shoved Don Nestor back hard. Don Nestor stumbled into a shelf, books cascading. Sosa surged forward, stamped hand raised, and grabbed the faceless man around the shoulders. They grappled, bodies colliding, knocking the table. The ledger slid, pages fluttering wildly like panicked birds. The paper with Eleanor's name trembled in my hand. Celia shouted, El Celo! The stamp! I looked, saw the stamp on the desk in the back room through the doorway. The faceless man was stronger than Sosa, twisting, slipping, like he knew how to move through bodies the way he moved through names. Sosa grunted, struggling, tears and rage on his face. Help! He rasped at me. I stumbled toward the desk, my legs shaky, my mind foggy from whatever had been taken. I grabbed the stamp, the heavy wooden handle familiar from my vision. Ink stained its base. I didn't know what to do, but instinct guided me. If he used names like shoes, maybe the stamp was the mark of ownership, the brand. I rushed back, and as the faceless man shoved Sosa away, turning toward the doorway, I slammed the stamp down onto the paper in my hand, onto Elena's name. The stamp hit with a dull thud. Ink bloomed over the letters, obscuring them, sealing them. The moment the ink covered the name, the faceless man froze mid-motion as if yanked by a hook, his face contorted, eyes wide with sudden fear. No, he hissed. ¿Qué hiciste? What did you do? Celia's voice was steady, almost triumphant. La devolviste, she said. You returned it. The faceless man staggered, clutching his chest, his breath hitching. His eyes darted to me, hatred and panic tangled. Mi cobraste, he whispered hoarsely. You collected from me. I stared at him, shaking, understanding dawning like a sunrise you didn't want. By stamping Elena's name, by sealing it, I had made it real again, made it belong to itself, not to whoever used it. And in doing so, I had taken something from him, his access to that name, his claim. The ledger, open on the floor where it had fallen, began to flutter again, pages turning by themselves as if a wind moved through paper from the inside. Columns shifted, entries blurred. I saw, in a dizzy flash, Sosa's name on the 1978 line smudge, fade, and then rewrite itself into another name, one I didn't recognize. The faceless man screamed, a raw sound, not theatrical, more like an animal caught. He stumbled backward, crashing into the encyclopedia's wall. The false panel rattled. Don Nestor, panting, grabbed him again, and together with Sosa they pushed him through the corridor toward the beaded curtain. The beads clattered wildly as the man was shoved out into the shoe stall, into daylight, into the ordinary world. I followed, stamp in one hand, the sealed paper in the other. Outside, the shoe stall looked absurdly normal. Shoes, polish, thread. The faceless man staggered into the street, gasping, clutching his chest. Passers-by stared. Someone muttered, "Está bien? Are you okay?" The man looked around wildly, as if trying to grab onto a name in the air. "Yo," he croaked. "Yo soy. I am." But the sentence broke apart. He couldn't finish. Without Elena's name, without the missing pages door, he was suddenly less solid. A man without a face again, but now without a script. He stumbled away into San Telmo's crowd, disappearing not because of magic, but because the city is excellent at swallowing men who no longer know what to call themselves. Sosa leaned against the doorframe, panting, tears drying on his cheeks. He stared at his stamped hand. Slowly, the ink mark began to fade, not disappearing instantly, but lightening, as if the account was loosening its grip. Celia stepped out behind us, her face pale, eyes intense. Elena. "Bethlehem," she whispered, looking at the sealed paper. "Ahora existe de nuevo," she said. "Now she exists again." My legs trembled. "What about me?" I whispered, voice shaking. "What did he take?" Celia's gaze softened with something like sorrow. "Te sacó tu coartada," she said quietly. "He took your alibi." "¿Qué significa eso?" I asked, panic rising. "What does that mean?" Celia hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Significa que vas a recordar cosas y no vas a saber si son tuyas," she said. "It means you'll remember things and you won't know if they're yours." "Significa que la gente puede mirarte y no ver lo mismo," she said. "It means people might look at you and not see the same thing." "And my name?" I asked, gripping the stamp. Celia's eyes held mine. "Tu nombre sigue tuyo," she said. "Your name is still yours." "¿Por qué no lo dijiste?" she added. "Because you didn't give it." Relief and terror tangled in me. "But I lost the story," I whispered, feeling the hollow widen. Celia nodded slowly. "La historia se puede reescribir," she said softly. "The story can be rewritten. Pero cuesta," she added. "But it costs." Sosa straightened shakily. "Hector," he whispered. "Hector Lamas," he said, and the name sounded like a prayer and an apology. "Can we bring him back?" he asked, voice cracking. Celia's eyes lowered. "No," she said softly. "Pero ahora va a tener nombre en la muerte," she added. "But now he'll have a name in death. And maybe," she said, looking at me, "alguien lo va a recordar," she finished. "Someone will remember him." My throat tightened. I looked toward Plaza Dorrego, just a few blocks away, the plaza still holding its benches, its stones, its secrets. I imagined Hector there, erased and then reclaimed. Too late to save his body, but not too late to save his existence from total disappearance. I clutched the sealed paper and realized the stamp had smeared ink onto my fingers, dark as guilt. "What do I do now?" I whispered. And the question felt huge, not just about this day, but about returning to a city that could trade in memories. Celia looked at me for a long moment, then nodded toward the shoe stall's workbench where Don Nestor's tools lay. "Ahora," she said softly. "Vivís con el hueco," she said. "Now you live with the hollow. Y lo llenas con cosas que elegís," she added, "and you fill it with things you choose." Don Nestor, still breathing hard, gave a short laugh. "Como un zapato," he said, "like a shoe." "Se puede arreglar," he added. "It can be fixed." Sosa looked at me, his eyes raw but clearer. "I'm going to write a report," he said hoarsely. "A real one," he added, as if daring the world to accept it. "Hector Lamas," he said again. "Plaza Dorrego," he said. "And this place," he added, eyes flicking to the beads. Even if they laugh, he said. Celia's smile was tired. Que se rían, she said. Let them laugh. La risa también tapa, she added. Laughter also covers. I stood there, stamp and sealed name in my hands, feeling my father's absence like a bruise. Somewhere in the city, a train was heading toward Rosario. Tomorrow still moving forward without me. The ticket that had stayed one day ahead was gone now, lost in the platform chaos, or reclaimed by whatever account it belonged to. For the first time since my father died, I felt something like clarity. Grief was not just sadness. It was debt. It was a ledger of everything you could no longer exchange. I looked at Celia. My father, I said, voice shaking. Did he ever get to return what he took? Celia's eyes softened. No del todo, she admitted. Not completely. Pero te dejó la llave, she said. But he left you the key. Eso es lo que pudo, she added. That's what he could do. I nodded, swallowing hard. The hollow in my chest where my mother's fever memory had been pulsed with emptiness, but around it new threads began to form. Eleanor Bethlehem's name returning, Hector Lamas's name spoken aloud, Sosa's stamped hand fading. Names as anchors, names as resistance. I looked down at my ink-stained fingers and realized something small and fierce. I could choose what I paid from now on, and I could choose what I refused to sell. As we stood in the doorway of the shoe stall, the afternoon light slanting in, a couple passed by carrying tango shoes in a box, laughing. The city kept moving, indifferent and intimate. Plaza Dorrego waited with its benches, and behind the beads, behind the encyclopedias, the ledger lay open, pages settling, recording not what had been sold, but what had been taken, and for once what had been returned. This has been a NeuralSurfer presentation.
Taza de café frío en la mesa manchada del once. El diario doblado en tragedia a las manos, buscando un sobre. Trenes que rozan mi nombre. En los vidrios empañados, una frase subrayada en silencio. El exilio es también el pasado. Buenos Aires, ciudad que lee en voz baja. En tus balcones cuelga mi fe. Guardo tu lluvia doblada en la caja donde escondí lo que no fue. Lluvia en Avenida Callao, charcos que imitan espejos, un perro que cruza la historia mordiendo esquinas de lejos. En Corrientes las librerías encienden su propio verano. Un verso sube por la valle, se me deshace en la mano. ¿Quién corrige estas erratas? ¿Quién subraya lo que duele? Tu sombra recorre San Telmo, bar por bar, pared por pared. Anoto tu nombre en la margen junto a una fecha imposible, como si escribirlo dos veces te trajera otra vez.